Hello out there, and welcome to the No Shit Cast. I'm your host, Matt Frazier. Man, we got the most interesting show lined up tonight. Thanks for joining me on my journey into the Internet College of Infinite Knowledge. My guest tonight, our show contributor, our chief show contributor, Mr. Reid Dillashaw, is joining me on the horn tonight. How are you tonight, Mr. Reid Dillashaw?
I'm very good, thank you. I hope y'all are doing all right.
I'm gonna have to come up with a nick. We're gonna have to get you a nickname, right? Because we have the Gray, the what was it? The Gray Wizard of Historical Knowledge. We got the Bond villain when he's in the studio, and then now we're gonna have to come up with something for you. I'll figure it out. We'll have to think about it though.
All right.
I haven't thought about it enough yet.
That'll work.
So a while back, I happened to just be watching, give you some context for tonight's episode. You know, I happened to be watching an episode of the Joe Rogan Experience, and he was interviewing this really fascinating author named Tom O'Neill, who had just written this book that he was on the show talking about. And that's sort of the kind of the premise of this whole thing, is this book that Tom O'Neill wrote. It's what's it called? It's Chaos, the Secret History.
Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the 60s.
Yeah. And so when I watched this podcast, the first thing I did was I shared it on the No Shitcast site, and then Reid picked up on it, and I had no idea you happen to be a big old sort of I guess a fan is the wrong word, right? But definitely it's a topic. The Manson murders and stuff is a topic that interested you.
As you said when we talked on the phone about it, it was visceral for us because it was something that stood out in my youth. Now, keep in mind, I was only not quite 4 when it happened, but my mom was following it intensely. And as I was growing up, especially when she got the copy of the book Helter Skelter,
right,
which Vincent Bugliosi wrote with some help, laying down the motive
right,
of the whole story. So it was just something when I was really young. It was my first realization of just how ugly some sides of humanity could be. And this is another interesting perspective because I think it factors into some of what O'Neill was uncovering. You couldn't help but notice the marked difference of how the culture, our American culture, changed from the 60s into the 70s. And that being probably the watershed moment of that change.
Right, for sure.
You know, which it was, in my mind, I don't think that was necessarily by accident.
Well, certainly it isn't by accident. To continue on through his work here, it's mind-bendingly not accidental.
No, but point being is, you know as well as I do, because we're not that far apart in age, that has been a cultural story that has come down. I mean, it's 50 years old now, but you remember in the 90s when it was a big thing, when Axl Rose was on that video wearing that Manson t-shirt.
Right.
You know, and that, you know, you heard in interviews and documentaries in the 90s. I remember one specifically where Leslie Van Houten was saying that she got letters from people that applauded what she did.
Yeah, it's a little creepy. Yeah, it's a little creepy. Yeah, and we should probably premise this by saying that in no way, shape, or form does what Tom O'Neill put together here vindicate or absolve them of any wrongdoing in any way. That's not the point of this at all.
No, not at all. But I guess, in like you were saying, in context, just understanding that just how deeply rooted and ingrained that whole helter-skelter crime, that murder, that Tate LaBianca murder case took on. It's just part of American culture, at least in our lifetime anyway, especially given where it happened. And when you think about all the cultural things that came together to a head in California in the late 60s, and something like author Jeff Genn would point out, who did an extensive book on this story. um, is you have to understand the times to grasp what was going on, especially how much adversity was going on. And when we think things are tense now, you know, with people, but it was big time back then. You had the anti-war protests going on, you had the Black Panther movement going on. There was so many things that were going counter to what America appeared to stand for during the 50s.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So it's important to understand just how volatile the 60s actually were. And of course, it makes sense that California would have become the epicenter because you had that whole, sunshine 365 days a year going on out there. You had
Yeah.
the Beach Boys that started that sound out in California.
Right.
Hollywood was blowing up out. That's where the Mecca seemed to be.
Yeah.
And
So
then
let me.
stuff like this happened. This Tate Love Bianca murder went down. The whole Helter Skelter story came out, and it brought pretty much all of that to a screeching halt.
Yeah. So the context here, obviously, what we're talking about is this book. The gravity of it is, for me, is this, that it's sort of several fold, and I'm going to fanboy out a little bit here on Tom O'Neill
Mhm.
because, first of all, this is the high water mark. This is the benchmark for things like investigative journalism and
Right.
investigative reporting, because he's done what was it? It's 20 years of research and pulling together enormous troves of documentation, of Freedom of Information Act requests, interviews, taped interviews, and all of these kind of things. He's pulled all of this together to put together this narrative, which we'll sort of cover as we sort of go through the bullet points here, of how all of this stuff is connected influentially throughout history, our modern history anyway. And it's mind numbing. It is so disturbing that my reaction upon having gone through the material, and I didn't read the book. I won't admit I listened to the book.
Well, I had to do the same thing. I
Yeah.
think the first print edition ran out, and they had to redo it, and it wasn't available until like midsummer.
So the good news is it looks like it's selling out. Like, this thing is
Right.
is crazy. And so like I said, I want to fanboy out here a little bit on Tom because this is what it takes to past the clickbaity headline type stuff to get to the real
Right.
exposure of things that are deeply hidden and probably embarrassingly hidden for a lot of what could be important people. He's
To say the least.
he's gone that extra mile to take the time to take these. I love Machiavellian type things that are super intricate, and there's lots of political infighting and or any of that kind of stuff. And he's actually taken this enormous painting or enormous amount of information and put it together that stitches together this timeline or painting of a timeline that, man, just fills in so many blanks for stuff that
Right.
we still would be looking back on without him and going, man, that doesn't make any sense. Like, what was the motivation behind any of this or any of that kind of stuff?
Well, and it goes beyond the pale to say that, I mean, it's beyond circumstantial. I mean, to say that any of it is a coincidence would
Right.
be just ridiculous. But more to the point, he proved Bugliosi lied,
Right.
covered up
Absolutely.
evidence,
Yeah.
covered up evidence,
Well, here's so instead of doing a review, because that's not what we're not going to review. You need to go to buy Tom's book. You need to go get the audio book.
absolutely.
I don't
Yeah.
care
Yeah.
how, you need to go get it and support this guy. Number one, because you're not going to be disappointed. You're just not.
No.
But
No.
and
In fact, it may be a bit of it will work your brain out because there is so much. He said that when everything was so intricately connected like a spider web to the point that if you looked at it, it looked like a solid sheet of fabric.
right.
And yet he managed to, in the course of the book, reveal it,
Right.
in
Yeah.
a
So I wouldn't.
comprehensive sort of way.
I was thinking about this today, right? I don't want to do a review because I want to do a reaction. And my reaction here is like, my first reaction was, what in the holy hell because of the documentation that he has is devastating. It is just, he pulled together so much documentation. The case that it puts forward is absolutely devastating, right?
It is.
And
It
what he
is.
did for me was he took a what I would consider to be for me a conspiracy theory, and has
Hmm.
now taken that out of that column for me and put it into the column of cover up. Like
Right.
it's
Absolutely.
and I think for a lot of people, if they read his book or listen to it, however you get it, that you're going to find that you come to the same conclusions based on his evidence, based on his
Hmm.
interviews and things like that. So that's profound for me because we don't really do conspiracy theories other than, to use a British term, to
Sure.
sort of take the
Well,
piss out of it. But this is not a conspiracy theory. This is a cover
as
up.
you said, about the documents, that was the whole game maker for me, um, because without that, that's exactly what this would have been:
Right.
speculation. And it was the reason that I paid attention from the get go, and understanding that he could back everything up that he had in that book, and what he had to go through to get a lot of that stuff, and even revealing how much he still can't get to,
Right.
And in fact, as he said, I think on Rogan, he had several chapters worth of stuff he couldn't even fit in the book. That's how large the story is. And it suffice it to say, no, what Bugliosi presented was kind of
So
fiction.
Bugliosi is this
But
character.
on a larger scale, it was like it's really only 10% of the whole story.
No, no doubt, no doubt. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, maybe even not quite that much. I mean, there's that much more
So
to
Bugliosi is
see.
this weird kind of sort of crazy character that if he wasn't documented as being a real human being, you would think he was a character when you actually learn about him and his life and some of the things he's done. But he was like a prosecuting attorney, uh,
Well,
right?
as O'Neill said, he was definitely compromised. I mean, he could definitely be made to do stuff. Either do this for us or your
Yeah,
career's done.
because he had a very interesting checkered past of misusing his powers and misappropriating his
Well, it even
authority.
raised questions of his mental health.
Yeah, big
I
time.
mean, seriously, more than one occasion, and again, documented.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Not to mention to the point that he even did as much for Tom O'Neill when he was sending his raving letters to O'Neill's publishers,
Yeah.
who
Proving
said
they
they
were
were
over the
popping the
target.
champagne at. He sent like a 35-page letter with a 50-page attachment, and the lawyer for O'Neill, I mean O'Neill's publisher, said they were popping the champagne corks.
Right.
Because it just verified, what
Yeah.
O'Neill had discovered.
That's what I
And
was.
O'Neill also pointed out that there were a lot of people who he did not put in a very good light on this, who are still alive, and yet not one lawsuit, not one threat, nothing.
Yeah.
Because
And I sort of
as
a
he
lot of
said in not so many words, he's got them, and
yeah.
there ain't nothing they can do about it.
Oh, it's damning evidence. Yeah, there's no
Yeah.
doubt. Yeah, it's absolutely damning. So to kind of stitch this through a timeline. So what we're going to sort of do is, like I said, this is more to me. This is more of a reaction to certain. So we're going to sort of hit highlights of things that are glaring.
Right.
And one of the first things that jumps out is that so you had this Manson family that was led by this weird dude that of questionable past anyway, and so but he was constantly visiting this clinic, this Haight
The
Ashbury.
Haight Ashbury Free Medical Clinic.
Okay. And
Yeah.
and these doctors that are associated with university, this is all documented again, different universities and stuff, but with the Haight Ashbury Free Medical Clinic, we're also running trials. I can't believe I'm saying this. Okay, on different things like using LSD on humans, on subjects, to make them impressionable, or to be able to sort of get them to what
And to study their reaction to it. But more to the point, they were doing it without the person's consent or knowledge. they were dosing them with LSD without telling them what was going on,
Right. Could you imagine?
and studying the effects, but also, and this is key, they were also figuring out the effects that it had on the people who had certain predisposition behavioral
Right.
tendencies,
So let's make sure
i.e.,
we're clear on that though, right? So is what you're saying sort of exposed here is that through this free medical clinic that was getting government grants and different things like that to exist. This is
private
back
and
in the
federal, yeah.
the 60s.
Hmm.
They were using that as what, a front to find test subjects and to run experiments and things on them without them knowing it.
Basically, yeah. Yeah.
Wow, that's
Well, because all right, I think key one of the things, since we're going in this on this particular point, you got to keep in mind that one of the three people associated with that clinic was a guy who was associated with a CIA program that was deeply entrenched in studying what LSD could do for mind control.
okay.
You
So
know,
it's
and
extremely coincidental.
okay, yeah,
Then that
you had
right.
you had three people, associated with the Haight Ashbury Free Medical Clinic from, especially during the period of 67 to 69, who were linked with two CIA programs and one FBI program,
All
right,
out of this same facility
out of the same facility,
at the
where
same
for
time.
for in a period of time, a year, a little over, a little under. I'm sorry, I can't recall on that one. During that period, Charles Manson and his girls, especially his earlier core followers, were coming in there with a lot of frequency, because one of those three people was also his parole officer. And, it's got to be said, Charlie's get out of jail free card he had that year,
Oh, right. Yeah. There's some real strange so that's another sort of revelation was the amount of times that different law enforcement officials picked these people up prior to the Tate LaBianca murders. Charles
right.
Manson had a outstanding federal warrant for his arrest the entire time.
And everything he was arrested for should have sent him back,
Yeah, he should have
get,
never been on the streets.
no, no. And yet, when you read the recommendations by that parole officer, who, by the way, also took care of Charles Manson's kids, bore by one of the young girls,
Right.
early on. Anyway, point being, and more important was what we said in the beginning of this, was all three of these gentlemen were, well, I use that word loosely, were working at the Haight Ashbury Free Medical Clinic. At
Right.
the same time, Charles Manson was coming in there. And it has to be understood a little bit that the mind control experiments they were conducting,
Now these programs, to your point, okay, so was Charles Manson just a crazy hippie? So this is the premise. Charles Manson's this crazy hippie, he takes a bunch of LSD and he goes and murders these people to try to start a race war, and somehow he was going to come out being the ruler of the. I don't know. It was fucking
right,
nuts,
right,
right? So,
yeah,
so
yeah,
that's Charles Manson. So that's the official sort of story, and that was the end of it, right? But
right.
while this was going on, from 56 to 71, the FBI was running a program called COINTELPRO. From 65 to 74, there was a project called Chaos being run by the
That was run by the
CIA.
CIA. Yeah.
Okay. And
Now,
from 53 to 73, the CIA was running a program called MK Ultra. Now,
right now, the first two programs, COINTELPRO and Chaos, respectively, were run at the same time. We're both running during that period, um, and of the two Smiths, David Smith was actually associated with one of them. Um, those first two programs were for infiltrating left wing organizations such as the Black Panthers,
right.
the all the anti-war movements and things of that nature. And again, understanding the times, places were getting bombed by war protesters
Oh,
back
for
then.
yeah, this was back during the when the Weather Underground was very active,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
times were very very tumultuous, very violent then.
yeah. And also, don't forget, who was it? Hoover was still in charge of the FBI back then, and he
Right.
was not. He was underhanded, and history has proven that in so many
And he
ways.
liked wearing his wife's underwear and weird stuff. I shouldn't say that's
But the
weird.
point
I
being,
don't know.
they were fear of anything that was undermining subversive to
Right.
the American ideals, and especially the anti-war movement. And that really kicked in after the Tet Offensive in '67.
Right.
Um, so, point being, the first two programs were for infiltrating and disrupting. They wanted to like ignite infighting in most of these, and did it successfully too.
Well,
To
okay,
some
so
extent.
let's talk about that a little bit. So they were kind of like, so you had let's say you had two extremist groups,
Mhm.
from either side of the political, ideological spectrum. Is that the right way to say
Right.
the political spectrum? Maybe is a
Yeah.
better way. So what they would do was, so we'll just call them, groups A and group B. You know what? Trust me, it's all the groups you think it is. Go into the
Hmm.
data; it's all in there. And
Right.
he would take and he would set up, or sorry, they would set it up. They would take people, put them in these groups, and then organize these groups to violently interact with each other. And
Between
it,
the Black Panthers and the U.S. slaves, who were a black militant
right,
organization out in California, Southern California. I think Oakland was their base, but
and
anyway,
and
and
it,
they did it successfully.
and so they wouldn't even, so they would sow discontent. They would go in and sort of interject subversive sort of ideas and stuff into these groups that
Hmm.
wouldn't maybe necessarily otherwise be even doing any of this stuff. Okay.
No, they would more
and
likely be allied to each other because
and
they had a united cause.
and it should not go without saying that this was the United States Central Intelligence Agency, which
Hmm.
is not supposed to be operating
On
inside
U.S. soil.
inside the
Yeah.
United States. And they would, not only would they take like extremist left wing and right wing groups, let's say, and have them clash with each other, they would take groups that were maybe further, not quite as far out and further out on the left or on the right, and have those
Right.
groups fight with each other. So the point of all of this was literally, as it says, was to sort of sow chaos so that none of these movements could coalesce in any way around any kind of real central ideology. That was even
Because to a degree, the right was scared to death with the traction the left had already gained. I mean, if you look at the scope of the '60s and how much of a change they did to our culture compared to the
yeah, yeah.
'50s, it was extreme.
Well, this was Eric did a whole thesis once on the Satanic Panic, because as it related to something that was really kind of dear to him, which at the time was like tabletop gaming, like role playing games
Right.
and stuff.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
But what he found out was that the Satanic Panic was just an extension of things like the cult panic that preceded it, which was sort of fomented from Jim Jones and Guyana, which now I wouldn't
Well,
be
and
surprised if
let's
I heard
not forget.
something weird about Jim Jones and Guyana, okay? But
No. No.
having to
No. But
rethink the whole Manson family murders thing now, right? But that was what precipitated the cult panic, which then just turned into satanic panic, which then turned
right.
into predator panic, right? They're just these same sort of things. But now
And
I'm not saying the CIA is responsible for all of those, but they're definitely playing on something in the human condition here, man. Like,
no.
because
But
this
an
thing keeps
interesting
popping
thing
up.
along this line that O'Neill pointed out. He had it was something that Polanski's manager had said in a later interview O'Neill got with him, that the LAPD at the time seemed to know everything about everyone. He mentioned Interpol, which is that police shared, or I think it's federal level shared information of people they're tracking,
Okay.
subversives,
Yeah.
Um, and he said that during that time, as he remembered, he said the LAPD knew everything about everybody. And O'Neill asserted that even though almost 4 months lapsed between the Tate LaBianca murders and it was finally revealed who had done the crime,
Right.
um, he asserts, and I think with good evidence to prove it, that the LAPD or the LASO sheriff's office probably knew it was him all along.
And yeah, and so there were people that had their hunches for damn sure,
Right.
and kind of
And
knew.
one of the reasons all of this we've been talking about stuck out to me, and we've kind of talked about this too a little bit, in I think it was last week, is given how the right, especially with Nixon in office at the time, and the unpopularity of the Vietnam War and the whole countercultural movement. Um, if you wanted to bring an end to that having an appeal to it, the Tate LaBianca murders certainly did it.
Yeah.
And then you add to that the narrative of the helter skelter motive.
Right.
Between that and the only other thing I can think of beside that within a reasonable time frame would be Altamont, that concert where the Rolling Stones hired the Hells Angels to do security, and a black man ended up getting killed like just a few rows back from the stage, got knifed by one of the Hells Angels. Those two stories it kind of like became a perfect storm where everybody had enough, and by the time the trial was over, which was in 1970, I think the public had just had enough. They accepted, they bought the motive. The people who did it were behind bars,
And it was the death nail of sort of the peace and love movement of that, because it said, hey, nobody's in it for peace, and certainly nobody's in it for love. It shattered.
If you look at the 70s and 80s, what preceded, I mean, in the decades that I was growing up in, I was born in 65, but the 70s and 80s, I was pretty much, that was my time. That was more of a kind of a selfish streak running there. The 70s was
the narcissism
was party your ass off and buy whatever you could. And in the 80s, it was just me all down the line.
Consumerism, big time consumerism. Yeah.
So, and I think it was interesting how O'Neill said, in some ways, it seems like the 60s seems further away than even the 50s or the 40s, the decades that preceded it. The 60s in some ways seem just further removed. And I think because that case is so linked with the end of all of that,
Right.
But again, I think to read Helter Skelter and think that's what happened is just misguided, to say the least. And I think everyone would benefit to just take a look into this and see all the things O'Neill uncovered, because he certainly proved that the Helter Skelter motive
was bullshit. It's complete bullshit. Yeah. So when you get down, when you just lift under the hood of Charles Manson for a second here, okay, and when you look at his history, he's a product of broken. He's a broken person from childhood. Okay,
the deck was stacked against him.
Oh, for sure.
One, so no question.
There is a point throughout his, there was a point in his life where he asked to remain incarcerated prior to all of this kind of stuff, and nope, you gotta get the fuck out, kind of thing, right? But then when he ends up in California. And when he starts showing up at the Haight-Ashbury Clinic, and he's down in that sort of movement, that is a remarkable departure for him as a personality, his habits, everything. When he lands there, because here's this guy that is he's not really super smart or anything like that per se. Okay. But then, so after after he's hospitalized and in prison and incarcerated, and he goes through this sort of process, he comes out a man of enormous amounts of influence. He has access to enormous amounts of these mind altering drugs
that few people would have had access to at
the time, right? And strangely available to him, and
the whole time.
The
whole time.
Yeah, it's insane.
I mean, considering how big that family got to be at times, especially out at the Spawn Ranch, that's a lot of LSD.
Yeah.
That really is when you think about it.
And they said that sometimes those people were staying in those altered states for days and days and days. So it was like a continual acid trip for these people.
Well, and since we're on this, we were talking about those government programs. We're going to link this one to the CIA MK Ultra, because the purpose of that one, and this is where a fellow named Jolly West was associated with it in the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic. But two of the main things that stick out to me, and this is something that O'Neill, again, he comes to a very rational, logical conclusion on this. And again, the documentation to back it up. One of the focus of West's studies with LSD was its ability to erase memory and implant false memories.
Right.
and I
Specifically.
guess,
Yeah.
and actually literally change personalities. But more to the point, also knowing what personality types to do it with,
Right.
and it just kind of stands to reason, I guess, that if someone is more easily influenced, that would be an ideal kind of person you'd go for. I mean, it seems like they'd be easy to, if they are easy to influence, that's your ideal person that you
Right.
want
So
following you.
so there should be a so
But it was,
I felt like the Haight Ashbury Family Medical Clinic or Free Medical Clinic was sort of a place where they were able to ask people questions and find those key markers to single them
yeah,
out in that
they certainly
society.
knew how to find that easy
Yeah.
enough. And you couple with that their experimentation they had already been doing for 2 years in that area with
They were
without
doing it at the
people's knowledge,
college.
inducing them on LSD. Remember they were talking about this. I forget the name of it, but they said they had a couple of brothels that was kind of a front,
Yep.
and they would, dose the Johns and just watch them
Yeah.
and just make notes of what was going on. But again, O'Neill discovered that some of the students that West had hired to do some of that stuff
Right.
couldn't figure out what it was they were supposed to really be doing, and they were questioning all of it. But something O'Neill had said, and you touched on
So
this.
stop there for just a second because you did point something out that was also extremely shocking to me. Not only is this a real thing, there were college grad students who worked for the program.
Right.
This isn't like
Without complete knowledge of what they were
of
doing.
what
They
they
knew
were
they were
even
giving
doing.
LSD to people without those people's knowledge.
Yeah.
They knew that, and they were getting paid to do it. So
it's mind melting, man. I know.
okay, all right, but you were touching on this, and this was something I wanted to bring up because I want anyone who's listening, if we haven't lost them already, because I know this has been a ton of information, but
It is. It's
it's
a
kind
lot.
of it's a way for us to keep on track of what we're saying. This was O'Neill's kind of supposition here. How had an uneducated ex-con, someone who months ago had never taken acid or maybe even heard of it, come to use the drug to such sophisticated ends? And wasn't it suspicious at least that he was coming to the HAFMC to see two people who were studying that very phenomenon?
Right.
The use of drugs to change and control and change behavior.
The same
Again,
drug. The same drug. Not only that, but the exact same drug, right?
well, and this is where it gets kind of ugly to me, and I'm just going to touch on this briefly. For anyone listening, when you get the book, pay attention also to it's towards, I think it's chapter 10 or chapter 11, where he talks about the two Smiths, and that's the link to the HAFMC. But he talks about, and I think it's worth listening to because I think this is kind of a key component here. The experiments that David Smith did with rats and mice. And part of it was, and I'm just going to touch on this, one of Smith's assistants said Smith used LSD on mice in hopes of making them more suggestible before he gave them amphetamines. Okay, and the amphetamine part of the study with these mice were they cannibalized each other. They literally, in confined spaces, they just turned on each other and tore each other apart.
Like animals. Yeah, they just went
Okay,
crazy.
keep in mind,
Vicious animals, I should say.
in both Jeff Ginn's book and I think it's mentioned in. I watched the movie. It was mentioned in the movie. I didn't read the book Helter Skelter, but I know it's mentioned in the movie that Susan Atkins said her and Tex Watkins before they left the evening of August 8th to head over to Cielo Drive.
Yeah.
They took some speed, and if you think about the fervor of the nastiness of the crimes, and let's not forget the Gary Henman murder before we overlook all this, because we know they did all three. Point being, it wasn't necessarily for this is just my own personal supposition. That's what knocks that whole helter skelter thing out of the picture for me. When you start looking at all of this, all of this evidence that he uncovered, all of these people who happened to be in the same place, what they were studying,
Right.
and then you compare that to what happened. That is so beyond a coincidence to me. Now, I'm not going to stand on a pulpit and say, I swear, but, by the heavens that this has got to be, but
Well, he's
I don't
asking
know what
too.
other argument you could make.
Tom is asking for people to take his information, look
Pick up
at
the
it
ball and carry it.
and tell
Yeah.
him where he's wrong.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's because it's so damning, I think it's sort of silenced. Like, I don't
Well,
think anybody that's into it, that's looking at it, has got to be just stunned right now if they're paying attention to what Tom's done here
especially for those who are familiar with.
with the subject matter.
Okay, and that's something that I think we ought to touch on at least a little bit, just
Yep.
briefly. As I said earlier, this is like 50 years old now.
Uh huh.
Okay, over 50 years old. Um, as big as it was, I would imagine to Mr. Devlin, it might be a buzzword, but he might not know the depth of it, at least
Correct.
not before we started talking about it anyway, you know. But by the same token, like O'Neill said himself, before he actually started with what was originally a magazine article in 99, um, he didn't have that much interest in it either. He had never read
Right.
the book, he had never followed it, you know. It was, and I think it was, that might have been what helped him, you know, in the long run. He didn't have an already set idea in his mind of what was. He just
Right.
followed what he was as he was uncovering it, you
Yeah.
know. And hats off to him for sticking with it. My lord, you know that.
Well, here's the you want the scary thing, right? We should we should point this out. They shut that clinic down what, less than a year ago?
3 months after the book was originally released.
So maybe about a year, over a year, just over a year ago.
Yeah.
So, it
Yeah.
was still operating well into 2019, 2018. Now,
Well, more
I'm
than
not saying that these programs were still operating there. However,
well,
it was
they had been
obviously
exposed by the mid '70s. They had been exposed to unsatisfactory degrees, but at least some light was shed on it. At least enough for O'Neill to be able to find what he needed to find, you know. But that being said, again, I'm not going to say this because I know it for a fact, but it wouldn't surprise me if they just changed the names, changed the
yeah,
stationary heading, you
and
know, and
moved on with business as usual. Yeah.
right, you know,
Now, let me recircle back on these mice experiments with David Smith, that we were sort of talking about, because
right.
so this is a good quandary here. Is like, was this a program that somebody was pulling the strings and decided to take what had largely been test subjects and then say, now we're going to actually, do you think it was like, we're going to move it out into the real world and it was
Well,
done on purpose? Because I sort of got the feeling from all of this that it was very likely that Charles Manson, to me, what's more likely is that he was an asset that they were grooming, that they were unattached CIA assets. So they're not on payroll or nothing like that. And they were
right,
sort of using them to try to move this thing along. That
right.
ended up getting tangled up with Charlie and some personal grievances and stuff that he had over record deals and different stuff. And the whole
Which
situation blew up and the CIA lost control of the asset.
Which, to point out on the record deal, and this is something Jeff Gann drove home in his book, and I think it's probably some truth to it, that Charlie, it wasn't so much to be a star, he wanted the money that would come with it. He needed more money to do. As his family grew, he had more grandiose ideas.
About what they were going to be, yeah.
Right, and that's something I think everyone can appreciate. You know, if you think you got a bunch of money coming your way, you're going to have make some plans with it, and then suddenly, you know, get yanked out from underneath
Right.
you. But I think as so far as the characters in the Hollywood circle and the music circle are concerned, I like what O'Neill said, at least to a degree, with the most important ones. When he said, could it be that they just got in over their heads with a con man? They didn't really understand just what he was capable of right off the bat, but because of his harem that they had free access to, and they were known as the Golden Penetrators. I mean, that was their whole goal, was to. They just got. I think really they got tangled up with somebody. They had no clue how
Right.
bad it would get.
Oh
But
my
more to the
God.
point, I think it sheds a lot of light that I think a lot of musicians, not just the Hollywood actors, but the musicians of the time, backed away from it because they don't want it to be known how. I get the feeling that Manson himself, if not his family, but himself at least, was a lot tighter in some of those circles than they'd
Yeah.
ever want to admit.
Then they're
You know,
admitting to. Oh yeah, I knew
yeah,
of him. Yeah, no, those people. Right. I met him a couple times. Was
Yeah,
hung
yeah,
out at the ranch or whatever, and spent
right.
weeks with him. Yeah.
Well, and it was something that Jeff Ginn had pointed out in his book that, and he was speaking of the three. I guess I should say their names. It's Greg Jacobson, Dennis. No, which Miller? Dennis Wilson of the Beach
Beach
Boys,
Boys, yeah, the drummer.
and Terry Melcher, who was a producer. He was Doris Day's only, son.
Son. Yep.
Um, but they did admit that Charlie did have some charisma to him.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, one of the songs that Melcher or somebody recorded, I don't know who did it, but you can find it on YouTube. It's called "Cease to Exist," and it's Manson with an acoustic guitar. It's kind of hard to listen to. I've heard worse singers, I'll tell you that. Okay. Um, but it's hard to get a grip on what that rhythm is supposed to be. It's like he can't make up his mind on
Right.
settling on a rhythm, so it's hard to follow. And then the Beach Boys were supposed to have done a version of it called, oh, I'm not even going to try to remember the name of it right off the top of my head.
Well, okay, so
Never learned to not love, something like that. Anyway, their version, I don't know how they even settled on recording it because
right.
it's just horrible. His point being, they got tangled up with him, and I think they were scared to death of the man. But I don't believe that they did it. They did what they did at Melcher's old residence to scare him, because they knew full well where to find him.
Right.
And O'Neill also uncovered evidence that Melcher had seen Manson 2 to 3 times after the murders.
Right.
And once at Barker Ranch was where they ultimately got caught, the last time. So, and again, I think it's just a case of a lot, and I'm just saying this based on I've listened to the book twice now to make sure I got stuff in my head. But that's kind of my take on that aspect of it. And O'Neill, as much as he put into the FBI and CIA programs and what was going on at the Haight-Ashbury Clinic, to me, had a lot more depth to it. And I got the impression that's kind of where the investigation was just pulling him, because the way each name would come up that would link him into and he'd say, "Oh, holy cow, this dude was associated with this. Are you kidding me?"
Listen,
kind of thing.
if you have any like love for like the films and sort of that era, even nostalgic, when you see the list of names that are attached to him that weave its way, so the to use a Marvel reference here, it's Hydra like Hail Hydra. It's Hydra like the connections, and you get why. Look, it was a monumental task what Tom did here, but you kind of start to understand why. Hey, this was Titan like because of all of the interconnected characters. But it is literally like the who's who list of Hollywood
of that
at
time.
that
and
time.
The musicians of that time as well.
Oh yeah, and the music, definitely the music business too. I mean,
Well,
the mamas and the papas are wrapped up in it. Mama Cass is wrapped up in it. It's like the Dennis Wilson, the Beach Boys. I mean, and I think Dennis had a lot more to do. Dennis, right, is not his brother. The brother was a singer, and
Brian Wilson and Dennis Wilson.
Dennis was
the one who was associated with Manson.
And
Because in fact, Dennis bragged in a what was at the time a local music newspaper. He said, "I live with 17 girls." That was Manson's girls.
Yeah, they weren't his, but I think I think he had a lot more to do with at least the founding of the cult, Manson Family cult. Right.
So there was one person that I'm glad you brought that point up, but I'm sorry I didn't put it in my notes. But there was one person who said that Wilson did brag that he and Charlie started the family.
Right.
And Jeff Ginn made the assertion that Greg Jacobson was the one who gave him the name, the Manson Family. Although I don't think that really took a lot of, being clever or anything.
So, I mean, before we sort of move on to our summations here, man, sort of where we're at, right, in our flow of notes, the other thing that really jumped out at me in this giant gotcha, holy shit, could change everything moment has to be the Tex Watson tapes. Okay? So Tex Watson murdered people, no doubt. Okay, violently
I would
murdered
imagine he
people.
was the one that did most of the
Most of the
dirty, dirty
murdering. He
work.
was this big dude from Texas, and okay,
Yeah, and you
so
put him on amphetamines, dosed up with LSD.
what
Oh
a
yeah.
what a lot of people, including myself, never knew, didn't know, was that
No.
when so after everything kind of went down, Tex split and went back to Texas. Huh. Ironic, right?
Yeah.
So and then as the connections to the Manson family started coming together, they obviously issued warrants for him. They found out he was in Texas. They issued a warrant to have the police pick him up down in Texas, and then they were going to come get him from Los Angeles.
But then he
Uh,
fought extradition for a
so
while.
and they fought. So Tex calls, like, I guess it's a family attorney down there. First, he tells him, the attorney's like, "Look, man, I can't help you if you don't tell me what's really going on. Is anything going on?" And Tex is like, "Yeah, no, it's not a big deal, whatever." Then he calls the guy back, and he's like, "Yeah, there's some stuff going on." So this attorney in Texas has Tex Watson come into his office, and for like 15 hours,
Yeah.
he has Tex tell him on audio tape everything that happens is what his lawyer is on the record as saying.
Right.
Those tapes are now in Los Angeles police custody just recently within the last couple years, and they
Yeah.
will not let them be heard.
No, and the thing I find interesting, and O'Neill mentioned this,
This is the first person account immediately after of a person involved immediately after the crime, the very first deposition of
yeah,
any kind. So it is the most closest to the incident retelling, and
right.
and they won't let anybody hear it.
No, and O'Neill pointed out that because Leslie Van Houten's attorney definitely wanted to get his hands on him, just in case there might be any exculpatory evidence
Right.
on there. Point being, the first time they told him, "Oh, there's nothing new on there." It's as they said, "There's nothing new on there. Don't worry about it." But then the second excuse they gave, they said, "Oh, on the first one they said there's no new murders on there," but on the second excuse that they gave, uh, you know, the court was that there were possible new murders
Oh,
on
for
there
sure.
that needed investigated. And
Yeah,
one
there
of the
could be
things
shit
that,
tons of people buried out at that ranch that nobody knows is out there. That
well,
people that
if
just
not at the ranch,
disappeared.
if not at the Spawn Ranch, at least the Barker Ranch,
Right.
which would have been far more desolate and less likely to be discovered. But again, that's that almost 4 month period after the Tate LaBianca murders. There's been some pretty wide speculation as to how many people they may have ultimately killed.
Oh, actually killed, murdered. Yeah.
Right. Now that part of it has me in a quandary insofar as this is my own personal. There's a part of me that likes to try to figure out who did exactly what, and I've always had my doubts. And this book shed light on something that Jeff Ginn touched on too. Whether it was one, whether it was Charlie, whether it was two people or more, somebody went back to that house between the time the murders were done, but before the police arrived.
Yeah, right.
That somebody had gone back to the crime scene. So again, that changes a lot of things,
And that's not
and
in this official sequence of events, accepted
mhm.
sequence of events. And that person has never been found. That person was
Well,
never
Jeff
interviewed,
Ginn,
right?
Jeff in Jeff Ginn's book, he asserts that it was actually Charlie went back because one of the things Charlie wanted them to do was get all the cash that they could.
Right.
They only emptied the pocket, I think, of either Frykowski or Sebring. I can't remember, but it was like $70. And again, this is in Ginn's book. Um, Said that Charlie was a little pissed off about that, so he drove back from the Spawn Ranch, drove all the way back out to Cielo Drive to get more cash or get some credit cards, but instead he got preoccupied with rearranging some of the murder scene to look more gruesome.
Right.
That was kind of a speculation on it. Now, Ginn cites one person for this account, and I think it was one of Charlie's cellmates, and um, I can't think of the guy's name. His last name is Emmon, Emmon, but I cannot think of his first name right now. Anyway, he was the one that asserted that Charlie went back. Now, in O'Neill's book, he talks about a character named Reeve Whitman. that actually did exist, but he was so to the point to where he wouldn't even go around his daughter until he almost was old enough to die because he didn't want her to be a weakness to him. The connection he
Oh
had her
my
over
God,
in,
yes. A
you know,
cadre of characters. Okay, right. These
well,
people
point
that
being,
are
this character was one who, according to O'Neill, who was supposed to have gone back to the CLO
right.
house
I remember, yep.
once the murders were done, but before the police arrived. And he even went so far as to tell somebody on his deathbed that he regretted he could have stopped it from happening, but he didn't.
Yeah.
But that's all that was said, and that's so vague. I don't know what to make of it. Point being, I believe somebody went back there, um, but that's as much as I can say. It's nothing I've actually researched, and I don't know that there's a lot of material available to prove any of it.
So the
Um,
assertions here, though, in Neil's book is that, um, okay, so Manson may have been a lab rat, uh, okay,
yeah,
for the CIA. Okay,
right,
this guy Jolly West, known to work in this program that was. They just found the financial records that proved that this program called MK Ultra experiment,
right.
which was specifically doing experiments with LSD and its effects on manipulating memory and personality. They just
Mhm.
happened to be together. Total
Right.
coincidence here.
Yeah.
There's
Perfect storm, if you
right.
want to call it.
And so it does sort of look like I said, to me, this was an asset. It seems more likely that it was playing with fire. Asset got out of control. Deny, cover up, deny, and make it go away. Right? Because
Which may be why it took 4 months to finally bring him in
there,
because they had to get stuff lined up
well, there's no
to cover.
indication that they ever stopped the other pieces of this, which was sowing the discontent among like
Hmm.
activist groups and different things like that to get them to do
Right.
violence against each other. Like I think they
As I said, I
continued
mean,
that.
if that was the end they were going for, they got it.
Yeah, it worked. And it destroyed the whole idea. Peace, love, tune in, turn on, and drop out movement of the 60s. It just killed
Well,
that.
and
We got
something that is
fucking
not
disco,
mentioned.
Reed. We got disco. Do you
Yeah, we
understand
got.
what they did to us, Reed? They gave us fucking disco. God damn it, Reed. I need people to be more upset about this. We could have
Yeah,
skipped disco. We could have had more years of Bob fucking Dylan and Joan Baez and the
disco, double
Beatles.
knit polyester, bell bottoms. It was the Brady Bunch, man. Um,
Sorry.
No, 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 no. But it just, again, to me, there is too much to be a coincidence. It's so much circumstantial. I mean, to me, it is amazing if all four of those people were still alive. I think Leslie Van Houten is, and I don't know about Patricia Krumwinkle, but I do know Atkins has died, and I do know Manson has died. Oh, I forgot Watson. Okay, so three. And
Yeah.
back to those tapes. Yeah, that's a case of where I'm like, I at this point, as old as that murder is, you got to wonder that the only reason that they won't let it out is because it will verify all of this. You know what I'm saying? That it
Well,
will just
okay, listen, just the data that's available today, the stuff that they can document, they have eyewitness testimony. When I say they, I'm talking about Tom O'Neill here and the
right.
documentation that he has. Okay, I'm not
Hmm.
using they in the woo woo they sort of
Right.
sense,
Yeah.
right? That everybody else. I mean, there is so much damning evidence of witness tampering, manipulation.
Well,
Okay,
putting witnesses on the stand that
that
really has to
are
do with the lying.
lying. Yes.
Well, and don't forget, they took Susan Atkins, removed her attorney, and replaced him with a former prosecutor, so that they had somebody working with
on
them
on their side. Yeah,
on.
in her. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's mind numbing, man. There's so much about this that would almost. I mean, because
Again,
here's the scary thing is the so when they go back and Tom. When he would talk to these law enforcement officials and these detectives, and they dug out their original handwritten notebooks because all of the official records would disappear and weird shit like this was
Right.
constantly
Right.
going on. Even though he had copies of the stuff because they were, it's so freaking bizarre. But
Hmm.
even when like all of this was going down, um, he so he has all this information, all this like crazy criminal information that would you could be grounds for at least a retrial, if not. But so I think the fear among law enforcement was, and they'd start to clam up because they're like, you don't want to let these fucking crazy loonies back out onto the street. And the
Yeah, which
problem
to me
is
is, I get it, I guess, I mean, on the surface, but in principle, the whole concept which Bugliosi prosecuted
right.
them on would have been proven grounds to overturn the verdicts just on that alone.
Yeah, so look, these people are they're dangerous people. There's
Yeah,
no
yeah, no question.
questioning that. Okay. However, the problem with the way that this thing has been put to bed is it does not leave any room for others who were culpable and or directly responsible
They
being
have been held accountable.
held accountable in any way,
Yeah.
shape, or form. It
And that was
stops it
something
at
O'Neill said too, especially in regards to Jolly West. He really wanted, because Jolly West, his entire career denied ever being associated, even though the facts proved differently, with MK Ultra. Um, he would have gone toe to toe with him. He would have welcomed that, and he has said as much. He said the same thing about Bugliosi. He regretted that he didn't get a chance to go toe to toe with him, insofar as he was that confident in what he had discovered.
right, exactly.
And again, I get that it's a fine line to a point, but to me, what's most important is truth. And if our legal system is supposed to be found on doing things properly,
Well,
I'm
look
sorry,
at
I know I can't even finish it with a straight face.
oh God, dude,
Um,
it's so ridiculous, isn't it? I mean,
yeah,
your civil rights violations, for, our foreign intelligence agency operating on U.S. soil. I
right.
mean, constitutional violate. I mean, it just goes down the list of. I mean,
Well,
the liability here is
and
overwhelming.
because it was started so high up and works its way down, that many people are going to get tainted by it and
Correct.
ultimately be a part of it.
Yeah. And I think
Um,
all of this shit just sort of gets buried in that malaise of, well, it's national security and it's top secret, and so for anybody to even try to go back and say, well, I'm going to sue for liability here for damages,
right.
I don't think you can. It just points out that this stuff is, there's tremendous amounts of malfeasance and tremendous amounts of abuse going on inside these air quote systems that are supposed to be put in place to protect us. Well, when
Right.
you're dosing people without their knowledge and
That
drugging
yeah,
people
you're
without their knowledge, American citizens that have constitutional rights, some
mhm,
shit's gone wrong, sideways here somewhere, man. It's so
beyond
alarming.
sideways. Right. And again, the distance they were willing to go to disrupt
What they felt were
left.
subversive political groups, basically, and things like that. Yeah.
Well, at some point they had to rationalize it in their mind to sleep at night, to do something like that, set that into motion. I mean, that's my thinking.
Look,
Again, I don't know. Maybe that's why I would never rise to such power, because I'm not ruthless enough.
right, you have a soul. That's okay. You're not
Yeah.
qualified. You have a soul. I get it. Look,
Right.
dude. Look,
Well,
it's in the news today. I just saw this today. Okay, I'm not going to take us down a rabbit hole, but I just want to use a point of context here. I just saw in the news today where Venezuela has captured two former American
saw that.
special forces
Saw that.
that they're claiming were backed by wealthy American interests trying to overthrow the president of Venezuela.
Well,
Like,
yeah.
you know what I mean? And then I see this and I go, oh yeah, I fucking totally believe this because look at
Yeah.
the news. Look what's happening. It's like
Yeah.
right there.
Well, and again, I mean, this was in '69.
right.
You
Yeah, we had a
know,
lot of weird shit. You had
they
bad
weren't
pigs,
even really. They
Vietnam,
weren't even
talking.
like exposed, and I think it took a whistleblower to do it with MK Ultra, but they weren't even exposed and called to answer to any of it until the mid 70s. So you had at least a 4-year window there where,
Right.
you know, indications were that when MK Ultra started in the 50s, it slowly over time, became a smaller and smaller operation. But again, the players involved, what they were doing, where they were at, the time they were at there, that I would imagine that a lawyer could look at this. I would love to actually get a lawyer's opinion
Wouldn't
on
that be
this.
great? I have a really
You
good
know,
friend who's a lawyer, but I don't know if he would do it. I've
I mean,
tried to
at
get him on the
least to
show
give an
before.
indication of, to say, yeah, they might actually have a legitimate argument that, by law, no matter how much people would fear letting them out, by law, they were prosecuted under false
Well,
pretenses.
I think Tom
Not
owned.
saying that they weren't guilty, but it just, I think, again, and the names that would have been exposed, and again, I think probably part of the weight may have very well been the weight of the celebrity element out there as
Oh,
well,
big time. I think it
because it
probably.
might very well have brought their names out there while they were
Oh,
still
bro,
relevant.
it's worse than that. I think that the people of influence that were involved were they were using the product.
Mhm.
Okay, so for it all to come out, that wasn't the only damning part. I believe they were probably using Manson and the girls to dirty up politicians, to dirty up prosecutors, to dirty up judges, to dirty up police officers. You know, I again. So I guess I'm erring on the more paranoid side here, and I'm saying I think that he was so wrapped up in the who's who of Hollywood, up to and including political officials, law enforcement officials. Okay, at that
Mhm.
time, I'm not, and I think that because
Well, again, he was under the tutelage of one of the Smiths before, or as he got there.
correct,
So
yeah,
in the Haight Ashbury area, let me clarify, in the Haight Ashbury area, this was in 67. But again, that was what O'Neill supposition, that's still in a lot, very big window to become a master of, using LSD to control people on your own.
right,
I mean,
exactly.
who the hell else out there was going to teach him those level
It's
skills?
all just a
So,
It's Reed. It's all just a coincidence, man.
well,
It's not.
and also to one of the points I got a little sidetracked, but when I brought up the amphetamine part of the rat and mice experiment, in that it's trigger of their violent tendencies, and how again Atkins and Watkins did speed before they took off to Cielo Drive. Um, the thing that no shoot,
Well, the studies basically said that these things when they put them in the cage together, basically
oh,
when you opened
I'm
it,
sorry, yeah.
it was
Again,
it was
my apologies
carnage,
here.
right?
I had a block here. That there was an explosion of amphetamines in the Haight Ashbury area, and I've seen on other documentaries that had nothing to do with Manson about that area that said once the speed kicked in, that the violence really turned up in that
Right.
district. Um, but this was something that you can kind of correlate that it didn't really show up until Smith showed up.
Right. You know,
So
when I look,
Yeah, I think it's important to keep all these factors in mind. Granted, I know it makes your head want to explode at times because there's so much of it, but it's important to see
so
to see the bigger
so
picture.
think about what. So here are scientists, and they have been dumping huge amounts of LSD, a psychoactive mind altering agent, into the community.
Right.
And then, like you're saying, so they're doing this, and now they're
Hmm.
studying mice. So you get the mice all trippy and get them all trippy,
Yeah.
and then while they're all trippy, give them amphetamines, and then Katie bar the door.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
boom! You just set fire to that community.
Right.
Otherwise, they would like that's what the study kind of says is that they would coexist, right, and share resources and things. So what do? They take a people, they dump huge amounts of LSD into the society, and then one day, here
Here comes
everybody,
the
here's
amphetamines.
the amphetamines, and just set back
Yeah.
and watch all hell break loose, right?
Right. And again, you had said something last week when we were talking about this, and I am in agreement with you that I think to that degree, I think Charles went off the reservation, and that they thought maybe they had control of him, and they didn't. You
Well,
know,
yeah, they were feeding into his ego and feeding into his drug habits and things for sure. And but I think they were propping him up. Yeah, man, you are this guy. You're going to be this messianic like figure
right?
that's going
Mm,
to sort of come out of the ashes and rule the black man and stuff. Like this story was that he was propagating and talking to people about is documented. Like they were trying to cause race wars. They were trying to cause strife between these different groups. And it
right.
feeds directly, not almost verbatim, into the psychosis that he was, when they wrote in blood on the walls and the different things that they were doing. It was all around this narrative. But where
Right.
did he get the narrative? Well, it turns out there was a very similar narrative that was being propagated by these agencies to foment unrest, right?
And the sadder part of it is, Matt, and this is something that I know it hit you too. Was we're not just talking about the Manson murders. If you look at the trail of devastation that was left behind MK Ultra and some of the stuff that
Oh
they
my
did,
goodness.
not necessarily on the same scale as the Tate LaBianca murders, but individuals whose lives were just completely destroyed.
Families whose lives were destroyed.
And I
Yeah.
mean, how the CIA would even dose their own colleagues, to the point. I think one of them, I am drawing a blank on the name, but it's kind of well known in CIA circles, and reporters know it too, of one of the agents who, at a Christmas party, was given LSD by his superior, and 9 days later, he supposedly committed suicide out of a 9-story window. But the belief was by the man's son that they took him there to, he had gone into a depression after he took the LSD, got in him, and they took him there to help him out to the hotel. And he committed suicide. Well, the son believes they just chucked him out the window because he was going to blow the whistle on
Yeah, he was going to be
everything.
like, "You sons of bitches, I can't believe you did this to me.
Yeah,
I have
and
rights.
again,
I have a you're skydiving."
yeah, and again, you think about it again. I mean, Manson was off the pages of the paper by before '71, basically.
Yep.
And this wasn't really brought to attention until the mid '70s. So God knows what else was going
Right.
on, especially after that. Although I do think they were probably covering their tracks after the Tate LaBianca murders were going on.
For
I do
sure.
think they were probably underway with that. Which, and speaking of the Tex Watkins tapes, I honestly, and it breaks my heart to say this, but I honestly think that they would destroy them before they'd ever let them
Oh,
be
it's
heard.
sad, isn't it?
You know,
Like right there's the truth.
yeah.
It could be a delusional truth, but it's at least the truth as Tex Watson
Well, it would
believed
at
it.
least put some of this to rest
Yeah,
once and for all.
for sure.
But again, and the thing, and the truth of it is, and it's just like the Kennedy assassination and everything that came before that. The more time passes, the fewer people who are going to really care enough about it.
Because it's so because they're going to be so good. That and I think they know that. Like I think
I
there's a,
think I
they
do
know
believe they count on that. I think they
if
absolutely
once you get
count
one
on
or
that.
two generations separate from the fact, killing civil
Mhm.
rights leaders, assassinating presidents, turning murderous gangs loose on the streets of Los Angeles. These are all, if you could prove them like after they happen, would be
Right,
like, oh my God, but they obfuscate. I
right.
can be throwing that word out there, right? And they just delay and drag these things out through things like, well, it's national security and we can't talk about that and all this shit. And by the time it comes out, the
Mhm.
truth, nobody's connected to it emotionally really anymore, and
No,
it just goes like fades into the sands of history. So
well,
now you had the chance to talk a little bit or correspond a little bit with Tom O'Neill,
correspond. Yeah.
and so after we kind of went through the whole, I guess it feels like you're having a stroke when you when you start reading all of this stuff and getting your mind around it.
Right.
And
Yeah.
for me, going back, rewinding, and going, "Holy shit, what did he just say?" Over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Um, what? So this book rocked me. It was like, oh my god, here's confirmation for all of this shit that a lot of people have been freaking out about, possibility of being true for
Right.
decades.
Hmm.
And like Tom was saying when this thing came out, it was reviewed well, but it didn't really stir up any kind of. Um,
No, and that was something that you and I talked about
I,
on top of all of this.
I felt that the response was underwhelming when you considering the.
I would have thought it would have gotten a bigger splash. I mean, but again, this was something that we had talked about before. This
Yeah,
apathetic, indifferent kind of reaction to something that should be, and not just for putting clarity on what happened with the Tate LaBianca murders per se, but the larger scale of what looks like an obvious major manipulation going on behind the scene of all of that.
yeah,
And you get crickets.
yeah. Not nothing. Yeah,
I mean, not to beat up the old phrase, but I think this is where it's appropriate. The silence is deafening.
yeah.
In
Considering
that
the gravity of the documented claims here.
you and I, and other friends we have who we've turned them onto this book, have literally been obsessed with it for like the last 2 weeks
Right.
because it had such a impact on us. Again, and I think part of that is because of when we were born and raised and our association. We were just closer to the event. It wasn't Dusty at that point.
Yeah.
Manson still hadn't gone gray, at that point. So,
Yeah, every now and then they'd rule old crazy Charlie out and stick him up on TV, and he'd say something nuts, and they'd throw him back in the cage, and that'd be the end of that.
well, and that's something else O'Neill said. He actually did interview Manson himself, but I mean, I get the same impression just based on what O'Neill said that he didn't get anything useful out of it. So and that's not really a surprise because all the stuff that I've seen documentary wise, especially since this book, gone on YouTube and exhausted a lot of their stuff. But he's always been in riddles. He has always been in riddles.
Yeah. Parables, I think he would say, because he's a messiah, he would say, I'm speaking in parables.
Yeah. Well, like one of the girls said that, he harped on the fact his name was Manson, the son of man,
Yeah.
He definitely had, he was broken without
He was a broken
the
human
LSD.
being, no question. Yeah, no question.
But that said, it's just that you just can't accept the official story anymore. There's no way. And when you step back and look at the size of what was going on, it was so much more than just those murders
Right.
were kind of a byproduct of what they ultimately wanted to achieve, And by they, I mean the CIA and the FBI who were actively working to undermine these subversives.
Right. Air quotes, subversive groups. Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Before we get too far off of it, now again, being blown away by the silence of it all, I went ahead and I took a chance. And I mean, O'Neill, it's not a big secret. He's got a Facebook page that's dedicated to the book. If you type in Chaos Charles Manson or Tom O'Neill,
Right.
you can find his Facebook page.
And all the documentation and access to all of this documentation, it's all there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Which again, I want to reiterate, that was one of the reasons it knocked us over so like it did, because he could back this up. And that's something that you and I, and Eric is the same way, and I'm sure most of the listening audience is, you're going to make a stance, you better be able to back it up.
Yep.
Otherwise, shut up. Anyhow, so I took a chance and I reached out to him. I was curious, and keep in mind, I want to preface this by saying I did not want to come across like one of those people to him when I reached out to him. So I wanted to know if I could ask him a few questions for the podcast show in regards to the response he's gotten since he's released the book.
Because we were alarmed about sort of the crickets. Yeah, it was like, what?
Well, I mean, I think one of the best things he did was go on Joe Rogan. I mean, otherwise it might have fallen through the cracks.
I'd have missed it.
That said, so I just wanted to know, what he'd experienced, and I just asked him 3 questions, and I didn't want to push it too far, but I think we ought to link the show, and I almost send a link to this show back to him.
Yep.
Because if there's more he'd like to say about it, I'd be glad to.
Oh yeah, Tom, open invitation, man. If you want to come on here and elaborate, we're all
on
ears.
Anything.
Yeah.
Or at least correct us if you think we've
gone
down the wrong rabbit hole here.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyhow, I asked him, how much indifference and apathy towards the discoveries revealed in your book have you experienced since it's released? All right. He said, total from the news media, not so much from the public, especially if they were already interested in the
Yep.
case, which was something we mentioned, and I think that does kind of stand to reason. Again, and Mr. Devlin, don't take this the wrong way whatsoever, but it wouldn't surprise me if he had less interest in it. Eric's not that interested in it,
Yeah, yeah. I talked to Devlin about it. He doesn't really have a lot. He knows the name, like you said. It's a cultural reference. That's
right.
about it. Yeah.
And we would have the same thing for things that were 50 years old prior to us, when we were his age as well. So, anyhow, I also asked him, I said, has any media outlet shown any indication they intend to make further investigations as a result of your discoveries? And he said, yes, a writer for the New Yorker got commissioned, but the story was killed without explanation. Recently, since Rogan, a freelance journalist with years of experience at the New York Times and the LA Times approached me and wants to do a story. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
That was his response to that. And the last question I asked him was, have you received more support from smaller podcast shows, blogs, vlogs, and other internet outlets than from larger traditional media outlets? And he just said, with one word, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that it makes me even more suspicious. Sure. I mean, if you're not hiding anything, prove it.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Otherwise,
and the way that this gets turned off with even still today, it's like, what is going on here that this is not front page or at least below the fold front page type? I get it's old and look, apocalypse,
it's
but
possible.
still.
I suppose it's entirely possible that even with all of our supposition regarding the government agencies, maybe even with all we already suspecting, we're still only seeing the tip of the fucking iceberg. I don't know. You know what I mean?
Would it be surprising given
just never stopped along the way?
That's what I think is more likely, because this whole like I just said, it's in the news again. Going into, this is Bay of Pigs level stuff.
Yeah.
Right. Going into Venezuela, putting an army of 300 and some dudes together and trying to overthrow the leader of a country. Okay. I don't think you're ever going to find direct ties between those people, maybe today, because people seem to be a lot sloppier than they used to be, but
True.
where you're going to be able to find direct ties between who and what interests in the United States were or maybe behind that. Okay. But we do know that there are two former U.S. military special forces citizens of the United States that are now in custody in Venezuela. And they didn't get there by accident.
No. It's not really. I wouldn't consider it necessary. I don't know. Maybe is it a vacation spot?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Do you, and on vacation, do you train militias? I don't know, dude. Yeah. Some people are into some weird shit, but I think this one's a little odd. How do you
get through the customs? I mean, anyway. Yeah, it's so, again, that it never really stopped. And I'll even go so far as to say it wouldn't surprise me that if the CIA never actually stopped operating here on our soil.
Yeah. I don't think they have. I actually, and I'm not sure.
Not if they thought they had anything to gain. And I mean, look at the distance they were willing to go already.
So I just watched not too long ago American Made, which is the movie about Barry Seals, who was a guy that was running the cocaine into the U.S. So what was he doing? He was loading up his airplane and taking weapons and shit into South America, and then on the other end, instead of dead legging back, trucker terminology, load the plane full of cocaine and fly it back to the United States. He was running Nicaraguan freedom fighters into Arkansas for training.
Yeah, I remember. I did see something about that story.
Yeah, all of this was a front for the CIA. There's all kinds of documentaries about the officials in Arkansas that were tied up in all of this. It all busted open when two kids got killed because they were on the railroad tracks, and that's where the planes would make their drops, because you could see the railroad tracks, so they would drop on the railroad tracks. And these kids were near the drop when the pickup was happening, so they ended up getting shot. So they,
Oh,
if I remember this right, they put their bodies on the tracks so that the train would run them over. So then the autopsy said the train that they got hit by the train. Well, the parents are like, "What the fuck do you mean? My kid got hit by a train?" So they
right.
asked for their own autopsies, found out these kids had been shot. I mean, it just ripped the whole thing open. But Ricky Rock in South Central California, the when you think about what was happening in Haight-Ashbury, they were
Mm,
dumping hallucinogenics into the populace. Then they dumped amphetamines into the populace.
right.
They were
Yeah.
dumping cocaine into the populace of South Central California. It was not there necessarily previously. It was then being cooked into this substance called crack
Right.
that
Yeah.
exploded down there and just basically ravaged that population.
Hmm.
There's direct connections between the CIA, Iran Contra. So there's this isn't this happens to be the one that goes back to the 50s and 60s. Like this is the crazy thing now
Yeah.
because when I first heard about the DEA agents and stuff started coming forward and the whole thing with Ricky Rock and about the crack epidemic and this is all outlined. What's it called? There's a really great American Drug War, the Great White Hope, or something like that, where a lot of this is documented. But when I see what Tom has put together here, what I start to see is a process, a MO, if you will, a
Hmm.
way
Right.
of going to business that's starting to show hallmarks of the same sort of, hey, that worked before, let's do it again, but we'll twist it here a little bit, we'll do this a little bit, but
Yeah. Mod it this way. Yeah.
it's the same fucking cake, man.
Well, and when you mentioned crack, there was a ESPN's 30 for 30. One of them that they did. It's been a number of years now, but it was about a basketball player named Len Bias. He had been
Yeah,
drafted by the Boston Celtics, and he ended up right after he got drafted, but before he actually played a game for him, he celebrated with crack cocaine for being drafted, and he died.
yeah.
And it was how they used that incident, which the persecution of young black men, especially with
Oh
crack
my God.
in New York
Yeah,
City, and the bigger cities, from L.A., New York, Chicago, all of them. That from the time that Len Bias died from that surge almost correlated right at the same
right
time.
at the same
You
time.
know,
Yeah, it was a perfect storm. Or
it
was it?
was.
Or was it a little too
Well, okay, now
perfect,
see,
right?
and more to the point, the reason you have to question that is because of the very thing we've been talking about so far.
Right.
The fact you see the distance they'll go to do what they want to do, and the distance they'll go to cover it up. You know, um,
Well, okay, so okay,
is it a stretch to say, yeah? I mean, why wouldn't we be suspicious of them with everything? You know,
we sort of struggled with this whole concept of how the hell are these people keep getting away with this. And first of all, look, it takes exceptional investigative reporting and or investigation to sort of put these kind of large complicated things together, right? And
right,
so one of the next things that we talked about was we asked Tom about the response in general to these kinds of revelations. And so conversely, when we talked about this, we said we need to go a little deeper than that because there's something weird going on here because this is just another example of how a lot of this stuff sort of just kind of gets weirdly forgotten about. And we're talking about things that
right.
have destroyed entire communities at some levels, and it just kind of just goes like dust and
Well, it's
disappears.
in that you mentioned that. I don't think it's any accident that it's as convoluted as it is when you look at just what might have happened with the Tate LaBianca murders or any of these things we were talking about. Hard to figure out because it's so many levels and depth of people involved. And I when I was looking for that specifically, like indifference and apathy from the general American public or people, when it comes to revelations of mass corruption, malfeasance,
These kinds of
and
things, yeah.
Well, the closest I could really find that had the most useful information, or at least help me clarify maybe something a little deeper that might help understand, it had to do with white collar crime. If you think about like the housing collapse, I would kind of put that under that umbrella, and that it was going on at the high levels of business,
Yep.
and in that it is so much harder to see that because the additional safety barrier of anonymity, the law enforcement have to dig deeper. They have more suspects to go through. There's more stuff that could be like covered along the way.
Yeah.
It just
Yeah.
meaning, as opposed to a street crime where it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, you stole that. I can see that thing which you stole. That's wrong. You go to
But when
jail.
but
Yeah.
when you delve into like say all the people responsible who knew what was going to happen with the housing
Like,
collapse,
right, yeah.
you go into that, you know, if I honestly think if everyone involved who were had any guilt related with that, there would have had to be a new crop of young kids to come in to fill their shoes
Yeah.
because so many of them would have gone
Right.
to jail,
Oh yeah, Matt
and maybe that might in its own be a small one of the reasons why they didn't
Matt
get.
Taibbi did exceptional in-depth reporting into the housing market crash. And again, nothing. One
Nothing.
banker, one poor bastard went to jail. And
Yeah,
he owned like a
yeah.
little, and he wasn't even like one of the major players. He owned like one little I think he might have been a manager. I don't even think he owned it, like some credit
Well,
union
and
or
it's been
something.
more than
Yeah,
proven that most of these CEOs of these or whoever was in charge of some of these banking firms that were guilty of this
right.
took the bailout money as personal payoff,
Like bonuses.
the
Yeah.
bonuses and such. And even when that was revealed, look, I'm not advocating, nor do I ever want to see riots in the streets. That's not what I want. But by the same token, you can't like go, oh well, it's out of my hands. I don't think it's safe to do that, or unless it's just so overwhelming and the distractions are aplenty, it's just easier to distract yourself and not think about it. I don't know.
Well, kind of
It's
what you're
just
getting at there too is okay, so at one layer, it really sort of falls between the cracks because you have to have law enforcement people that understand that what is being done is actually illegal, and a lot of this gets technically so far past
right. And
regulatory bodies that they're like, I don't know.
to that point, and in the same paper that I was looking at, this was a peer-reviewed paper, by the way, that one of the other problems is in criminology, they don't really teach about white collar crime.
Right.
It's
Yeah,
not
it's
covered the
street
way.
crime, violent crime that they sort of
Right.
focus on. Yeah.
Yeah, and at the same time, I mean, and you factor in on top of that, especially with white collar crime. But I would go so far as to say anything, a lot of private corporations do work for the government. You know, I mean, when they needed LSD back in the 50s, they went to a pharmacy up in who was it? I forget which state, Indiana or somewhere, who would make it for them. That was a private company
Apparently
who
by
made
the
it for
buckets.
them. So, all right, you factor the news media into it, especially the large media outlets that we are so familiar with. Um, they're owned by larger corporations. And if something revealed may put some of that corporation or some of their
Or
head
some of their
honchos
assets.
in bad light,
Jeopardy. Yep.
and they control the media.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, just as all right, this was in 2012 when this one was done, so it's a little outdated, but to a degree, I think it stands relative um, or relevant. Say, too few people are in charge of deciding what American public hear and see about in the news. 232 media executives control the information diet of 277 million Americans. That's one media executive to 850,000
Right.
subscribers. Now, I do think that is probably going to come down a bit because, especially in the last couple of years, more of the individual is making use of YouTube and the tools and technology we have available to be a bit more voices out there. We have more to
Sure.
choose from,
Yeah.
and who are willing to do the diligent work and do it the right way. And they're not bound because their paycheck comes from somebody who can tell them what's okay to report
Exactly.
and what isn't,
Yeah.
So I think there has been great advantages since, that was mentioned, like GE, News Corp, Disney, Viacom, those companies own most of the major, or they did. But point being that over time, like the internet did to the major record labels,
It's pulling
people
this.
are finding a way
Yeah.
around it, and thank God, because again, think about Joe Rogan's show. If we wouldn't know anything about Tom O'Neill or his book,
Right. Yeah. Thank
because
God. Yeah.
it only got reviewed. Look, I don't get the LA Times, the New York Times. I'm not going to pay for them, but I don't look into the newspapers for book reviews. Maybe I might have stumbled across it at some point,
Right.
but the point being, I found it on an outlet that isn't bought or paid
This is
for by somebody else.
this is so stupid lucky too because Tom O'Neill happened to be neighbors with a comedian named Greg Fitzsimmons.
Yeah, yeah,
Greg Fitzsimmons is good friends with one of the largest podcasters in the world.
yeah,
That's how close this would have been
yeah,
missed
yeah.
had that not
Degrees
that.
of separation. I mean, it applies even to O'Neill getting the word out there.
Yeah, for sure.
And I know people have covered it. I know it has generated some interest, but I noticed that even just the other day, I made a post about it. I was on that page and I wrote a review on it, and it showed up on my timeline on Facebook. And even still, I had people who are true crime lovers of true crime books. They were like, "Oh, I'm all over this. I
Yeah,
didn't know
yeah.
about this."
Still,
So
it's
again,
kind of fun, isn't
anyone
it?
who
It's
reads it, pay it forward and help promote this thing
yeah, big
because I
time.
do think, more importantly, I think it keeps us talking about stuff that really we need to be focused on, are concerned enough about to want to do something about,
For sure.
I think part of that is not shutting up about it. There was a part of me when I first was reading that, towards the end of the book about the Tex Watkins tapes. My first reaction was, "We need to storm the LAPD." And I thought, no, no, that ain't
No,
gonna
that ain't
work.
gonna happen. That's a bad idea.
That would backfire in so many of all the worst ways. So let's not do that. But it was just kind of that part of me that just wants to get the
Right.
truth out there.
Let's hear
What
the
the hell
truth.
is so hard about this? I mean, even if it uncovers and we think that this book shook us to the core, if we learn the truth, it would leave us comatose. I'm
Right.
fine with that. I'd rather know. You know, um, Again, and I would say this also. I know that the people listening to the show are intelligent people. In regards to the indifference and apathy, if any of y'all out there listening to this have any insight, know of any articles or books that deal with this, even if it's in related to one type of kind of corruption or anything, like, just let us know.
Yeah, because so basically we went down this path of trying to figure out why there's not a hasn't been to this type of expose and others, why there isn't a more visceral response like we've had.
Right.
We can kind of find some white papers. There's definitely has a lot, we think, has something to do with the way that white collar and other types of crimes are even prosecuted,
Or yeah, yeah,
and so
and
forth.
I excuse me, I'm sorry, I was going to say, and this is my own definition. When I say white collar crime, I mean political corruption, police corruption,
Bank,
and
yeah,
government
yeah,
entity.
insider trading, these kinds of
Yeah,
things.
all of
Yeah,
that. They're not street crimes.
right.
Which is the big
Or
distinction.
a violent crime necessarily. They're violent to people's livelihoods and things.
And more to the point,
Yeah,
I mean, and this was something the paper reiterated, that white collar crime is so much more costly to the whole
society.
country.
Yeah,
I mean, you're talking $250 billion to possibly $1 trillion over a space of,
right.
like, I think, a decade or something like that.
But people can't get there. So and so what's happened here, like with the Mansons, there's a complicated truth
hmm
and a convenient lie.
Yeah,
And the Manson family murders is in the complicated truth. We never even talked about that because over here is this convenient lie.
yeah.
It sums things up enough for all of us to be able to say the bad guys are in jail. We don't have anything to worry about. Everybody can go back to bed at night and
And
stop.
and I believe I can't prove this, but I do believe that that is something that the CIA is well aware of, or anyone who's
Like
out
it's
to do
baked
this
into
kind
the
of thing.
human condition, man.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
anybody
are
that's ever
absolutely
advertised anything understands how this works. It's
right.
yeah,
Yeah, and they I would believe they're absolutely using that as well, counting on it.
absolutely, yeah,
Just kind of we went away before once they were put in jail. So hopefully, once the hoopla of this book dies down, they'll just go away
yeah.
again.
And what it
I
really should be telling people is, look, this is a compass heading. This book isn't a definition; it's a compass heading to
mm,
for you to start for me anyway to start sort of re-examining everything I thought was true, or at
right.
least the narrative through which I understood it could be corrupt, and I have to relook at everything again for sure.
Well, that and there was also the frustration. I'm just so sick and tired of finding out that something I thought was actually wasn't. You
Yeah,
know, and
maybe
that I
you know what?
suppose will never go away. There's always going to be people out there to deceive and hide their deception as best they can, and some more successful than others. And I do believe that it's possible for groups of people to hide big secrets for a long time,
Yes,
contrary to what some people want to say. I think it's possible if they stand to lose something personally. Yeah,
yeah,
I mean
for
they may
sure.
not have a collective thing in common, but individually they all stand to lose
Yeah,
something. So I could see how that alone would be motivation to shut your
it's
well, I
not
mean, look what O'Neill ran into with people, just trying to get some of these people to,
right.
to fess up to something, and he wasn't afraid when Bugliosi was alive to confront him with what he had discovered. And he didn't back down from none of the threats because they had no teeth.
At
And
that,
he knew
yeah,
it.
yeah, he knew it. Yeah, he had them for
Yeah.
sure. I tell you. So as we wrap up here, I'm I- I'm really, I guess, optimistic now that I was really sort of in a dark place when it came to the concepts of investigative journalism. As I
Hmm.
was sort of at a point where I was like, it's over. It's never coming back as we've known it. The
Yeah.
Titans, the Edward R. Murrow sort of
Yeah.
titans and winners of journalism and reporting and stuff. And after I've seen what Tom O'Neill has done here, it has sort of relit my fire because I thought Matt
Right.
Taibbi was probably it. He was sort of the like I was like, my God, is he the end of the old guard here? No, man. It's great to see that there are people out there, real gumshoe like dudes that are really really willing to dig
Willing to
into
do the
something.
work.
And 20 years, what started out
And
as
oh my Lord, I mean,
a
what he
magazine
sacrificed
article.
along the way
Yeah,
is its own story.
personally for the story for sure. Yeah, big
Yeah,
time.
but that being said, I mean, I don't believe, and if he ever watches this, I hope he knows it still wasn't for waste. I mean, it really electrified some people.
Yeah, big time.
I'm one of them.
Me too. Yeah, thank you for
And
writing this book, Tom.
yeah, and
My
for
God,
for
man,
your
you
dedication and devotion to
and
it.
what a perfect time! I tell you, the middle of this pandemic, I'm
Yeah,
locked in.
that helped
I'm
too,
going
no
stir
question.
crazy, and then I find your book on Rogan, and man,
Right.
this has been so awesome for sort of filling that space in
Right.
and
And
stuff.
for anyone who's interested, also, even if you get the book, go watch his interview on Joe Rogan because he lets a few tidbits out there on that's
Yeah.
not in the book
Yep.
that even further solidify the whole stance he's
Yep.
making that none of this was an accident.
At
So,
all.
yeah,
At
um,
all. God.
but and I would encourage anybody. Yeah, it's worth it. It's worth the money. And go listen to it. You're going to have to listen to it more than once. If you get the hardback cover, I'm still waiting on
Yeah.
mine when the print comes out. Um, but it's the best book I've read in a while because, as you said correctly, it was well done. It
Yeah.
was investigative journalism and he lays out the book. You can tell the same way he investigated it and
Yep.
as it came to him. Just when I thought he had it pinned on one group, no, no, turn a corner here, no,
Yep.
no, it gets even
No
deeper than that.
no
And
sacred cows either, man. No sacred cows,
no,
no stone left unturned. You really get that sense
no,
from him. There's no
yeah,
agenda other than the truth. That's his
and
agenda. Yeah.
right, and that was what he said all along. He just wants the truth, and that's what we're appealing at, I guess, when it comes to the indifference and apathy. How could you not want to settle for that?
Right.
If once you know you've been duped like that to a degree. How can you settle to let it happen again? I
Right.
mean, if it does, then I guess maybe they've dosed us and we didn't even know it. So,
You know, that's a good note to end on, Mr. Reid
yeah.
Dillashaw. Thank you so much, man, for taking the deep dive on this with me and doing the background research, and for certainly for reaching out to Tom and getting that correspondence going. I really appreciate
Well,
that, man.
I was going to say the thank you is mutual because you were my sounding board. That was something we both, because we got into this so much, it was
Yep.
really cool to be able to talk to you about it to the degree that I did. And again, for anybody out there who's got insight on the indifference and apathy, please let us know.
Yeah. We'd certainly
go
like to
for it.
hear your opinions on that, because we're still coming, sort of coming up blank on it.
Well,
for a very specific definition anyway.
I may very well in the future, not the next story that I do for y'all, but I may very well in the future go back to the CIA, because just in trying to find some stuff about apathy, I uncovered several stories I had no idea about.
Oh, shit.
Just as mind blowing.
Here we go.
But yeah, well, it just in a case of, did you know? Did you know?
Right.
Did you know? But again, some of it was so far back the CIA wasn't involved, but it was just understanding how fear has placated the government, on a lot of occasions.
A lot of occasions. All right. So thank
you for having me on. I'm very grateful.
Mr. Tom O'Neill, my megaphone is yours, sir, should you ever want it. Thank you so much for responding to us. I hope we've done your book.
Thank you.
Please, I hope we've done the book the service that it's due.
Right.
Folks, go buy this book. You will not be disappointed. It will set your brain on fire. It's worth every single page for the amount you pay for it. It's gold. Please check it out. And all right, we'll wrap up there. Again, Reid, thank you for joining me tonight. Thanks for listening, everybody. Check us out at www.noshitcast.com. It's KNOWSHITCAST.com. Make sure you hit those like and subscribe buttons. Give us a share. We greatly appreciate it. And leave us a comment. Maybe we'll get back to you. We will catch you all next time. Thanks for listening, everybody. Bicycles.